You're about to hear a conversation at the edge of what matters, what is possible, and what it means to be fully alive. I'm Ari in the air, and this is Into the Wind. Okay, Lubo, nice to see you, man.
Nice to see you too, brother.
Let's start with, what do you think are the biggest pitfalls in today's world for men and their embodiment and development?
Embodiment and development. The pitfalls. Well, we have a lot of very salacious distractions around us, and a lot of reasons to be distracted, to be distracting ourselves due to the tumultuous nature of being a human being with all of our unruly emotions and confusing thoughts and uncertain pathways through reality in our lives, and no clear direction right now. As we all know, we have the breakdown of 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 instituted paths, but also at the same time we have a revelation of many possible paths coming out from ancient times and various traditions that we can cherry pick from. And that's another issue, because many of them seem promising, many of them seem correct and right, and they probably are with enough discipline, and they probably are if we are of the right lineage, because that matters too. And there's just so much right now. And then the embodiment piece, which, just to quickly define that for myself, embodiment means walking and acting in accord to what, perhaps one's philosophy is, but more importantly, being a spiritually present being within the body and occupying that fully to the fullest extent. And of course, that is also a work in progress. It's not something that we can just switch on and off. It's one of the soul paths. It's perhaps the main soul path on earth here for us. And that means coming into right relationship with all of the things that make us flee and dissociate from the body. And, I'm sure we have the next hour to talk about some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, you just outline very well, so let's break it down. You say there's many salacious things trying to distract us, and that there is much to be distracted from and reasons that we would distract ourselves. So let's start there. What are the
Yeah.
most salacious distractions right now that are being fed to us? And then secondly, what are the strongest reasons we have to distract ourselves?
Well, I can think of two categories of salacious distractions. So one is seemingly something that we think or feel we will get something back from, and the other one is um, just sort of tuning out, zoning out. In a way, both of them are zoning out. But so let's say sexual pursuits. Sexual pursuits, and that's pretty obvious in what it is. There's pornography. We know that that's kind of a secret pandemic, even though we kind of know it. We also don't talk about it. So that's an underlying current within families and fathers and brothers and children and sons, and it's a thing. It's a sickness, and it's also a very delicious sickness, right? There's a lot of excuses for it because it frustration, stagnation, procrastination, all that pent up energy needs to be released, and it easily can go into pornography, right? And the release of life force. And so then there are all the, there's so much to really, there's so many things that promise to give us rewards and a final fulfillment. So I think I'd rather address the principles. The principles here are, a promise of living life, of being free, of exploring real important impulses as a human being, right? Things that we all want to integrate into our lives is good exploration, good wonder, excitement, all that stuff. And yet, for some reason, we generally, when we're coming from an uncalibrated place, we tend to pick the pursuits of discovery, so-called wonder, so-called adventure, etc. We tend to pick the wrong ones, which ultimately do not lead to that final fulfillment or satisfaction. Sometimes they lead to skill development, some competence, which is great. It's a byproduct. We can always course correct. And sometimes I think they lead us down other paths. And And
Give
then,
me just a couple examples of these wrong adventures that men find themselves toiling
yeah,
down.
yeah. So it's, you know, the I'll just call it the ego, and we can talk about proper terminology, but let's say the outer self or the lower self that we function through, combined with the mask. So our pain body and our public persona. Just give it some new kind of definitions. That complex, it feels like it's looking for completion, right? It's always looking for some sort of satisfaction, a sense of fitting into the now, into the world, into receiving the whatever that completion is, that simply is not there, and we know,
Mhm.
we all know that. And so those pursuits could be anything that could be that would embellish, inflate, enlarge, or seemingly complete the sense of self. And I think mostly in the eyes of others. Because if it was only in our own eyes, I think the game would be different.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times we think we're doing it for ourselves, but really, that false self can only be satisfied if we see that reflected in the eyes of others, mostly in our imaginations, actually.
Wow.
If we imagine that the others are impressed appropriately, or satisfied. So what are those examples? Again, I wanted to go into principles because the underlying structure to me is very similar.
Mhm.
But that could be a false career path. you know
Mhm.
um, it could be pursuing, let's say, a variety of women, or the wrong type of women, or creating a numbers game out of women, um, for the purpose of proving one's virility to oneself and others. I mean, exercising inner demons and unease, or sexual trauma, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's excesses of any kind. I mean, at this point, it's perpetual healing within the spiritual community.
Mhm.
Could
Yeah.
be many things that seem healthy, like continual health maxing, supplements, diets, and incredible routines, which are all valid. But if the underlying structure is off kilter, those things don't seem to. They make a dent, but ultimately they don't align us. So
Yeah.
maybe I'm being too strict here with my definitions, but these are my own standards and my own musings, around my own
No,
life.
I honestly, man, I think that everything you say resonates. And through my own lens, it's like paragliding is such a wonderful sport. It's so incredible. It can teach you so many things. But it is also something that can be used in a compulsive way, that is addictive, that is distracting, that is this false sense of adventure, um, that gives you this fleeting sense of completion in your life. You say, career can, is so often one for men. And I've seen this so much in my clients, people who make a ton of money, entrepreneurs, build things, ascend to high ranks in companies, but ultimately uh, realize that it has not completed any deep piece of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this sense of completion, I think, is being challenged now. We have the 20th century in the West. We've had an opportunity post World War II to this incredible opportunity to self-examine more, and to spend time and money on on quote unquote bettering ourselves. So it's this thing about my personal fulfillment. And I wonder historically how much that has been a thing to be personally fulfilled. Now,
Mm-hmm.
of course, there's the pitfalls. We know I guess we're going into like subtle territory here. Yes, it's not about living for others and sacrificing oneself and denying one's inner calling. But now I wonder if we're entering a territory. Obviously, the world is changing in unprecedented levels and speeds, and it's very stupefying to many of us. I wonder if there's a greater calling to really go beyond the I am fulfilled and the my fulfillment trajectory and my fulfillment quest. And fathers will know probably better what I'm what I'm going toward, but or some fathers, which is also so I'll say quickly. So living for a family, for a tribe, for a culture, for a village, post World War II, for various reasons, of course, and understandable reasons, there has been this narrative that it's unsophisticated to care for your people, specifically if you're from the West. Okay. Now, what that does is creates an atomized society of individuals who are ashamed to care for their own. Now, the rest of the world doesn't feel that, which is great, and I commend that. But we as human beings, we create bubbles of common practices and behaviors and ethics, and those common bubbles and those who adhere to them become a tribe. Some tribes have very poor decision making, and we see that in destitute homes here around Toronto. There's certain neighborhoods where you see intergenerational trauma haunting households and neighborhoods, because those are the practices, behaviors, and ethics that unfortunately these people have cannot surmount, again, for various reasons, some of their own doing and others that are institutional. But the good practices and ethics, that is beyond the personal fulfillment. And that mission is, I think, what is now calling a lot of men to move to another level, another baseline. But it is difficult because many of our fellow humans are choosing not to align or even consider any of these higher ethics, practices, ways of living, right? So it's not always easy to find that tribe. And actually it's not, I'm sort of going on tangents here, but I'll just keep flowing. And I don't also think it is a matter of finding it. I think it's a matter of building it and beaming the energy, holding the field, and allowing whatever needs to magnetize to that, to magnetize to it.
Wow.
So,
This is beautiful. Let me just reflect back to you, kind of in my own words, what this process is like, and add what I think is a really important distinction here. This idea that the hyper individualist message that we've gotten in the West post World War II that makes people averse to dedicating large parts of themselves and their effort to serving their people, their tribe, their village, is incredibly troublesome and leaves men very susceptible to seek that kind of completion in all kinds of distractions and compulsive behavior. The thing that I want to add here is that the way that I've understood this and the way that I've taught this in men's group specifically is that you can't actually go towards serving other people until you put yourself first. Because if you bypass yourself, you actually go into service in a way that makes you, it's basically seeking approval. You're seeking approval if you bypass yourself primarily. So it's actually the requisite order of operations is that you have to serve yourself first, and this protects your relationships from resentment that can easily build if you serve before you are yourself. And only once a man achieves some baseline mastery around his own feelings and needs can he then start to transcend and include that so that he can begin serving from a really true place and can be sustained in the process. So the process that we talk about in group is first, it kind of like starts in the realm of nonviolent communication. Like, do you even have a vernacular for what your feelings are? Do you know where they arise in your body? A somatic awareness. And then also recognize that your feelings evolved in nature to point you towards your needs. You feel hungry so that you eat, and thirsty so that you drink, and lonely so that you connect. This is just putting a man in the driver's seat of his organism, like kind of the most basic level.
Mhm.
Um, so, what do you know about this process? Does this resonate for you as the correct order of operations?
It does, absolutely. And as you were saying that, I was like, yeah, of course, of course. And what I was saying previous to that is I was just as I was riffing on what felt inspiring, and I was kind of charting some new territory there for myself as well as I was speaking. Yeah, what you're saying is absolutely true, and I was speaking from my own lens and where I am right now. My work of realizing though that fundamental work on myself is not complete, but I've done a good amount that I can now feel sufficiently inspired to grow my aperture and my circumference of influence beyond that. And so, yeah, I want to say that as it's not prescriptive. Um, but to get back to the practicals of what you're talking about, we as human beings here. I mean, ultimately, I wonder if do we need to do anything for anyone or anything else on this earth, or do we simply need to embody more and more of the true signal of God?
Mm.
And what is, what do I mean by God and what do I mean by signal here? Well, I can't define, obviously the first one, but this creative impulse, this source signal,
Mm-hmm.
which moves through us in greater and greater amplitude, the more that we clear away the static of the self will, the incessant thoughts that we barely even choose, the emotions that we have no agency over, that just sort of happen, and the humility that we realize that we are sort of just these vessels that things happen to, who think they self-author, but they don't. When we start getting into right relationship to that and allowing through some humility this greater power and intelligence to animate and inspire us and co-create with that, then that human being, I think, is enough. But I think what happens, and to answer my own question here as I'm talking, what happens in that process is there's a greater inspiration now to actually beam that out. And that's what I think the true meaning of a blessing is to beam that inspiration out through our own actions, emotions, and thoughts
Mm.
toward others.
Yeah.
And that is the greatest fulfillment because then the microcosm of the great macrocosm begins, just continues the great work that we're part of, that we're just part of this web. So inevitably that will shower out toward the others. But yeah, the primary, I'll just, you know what, there's so much, I can just keep going, but I feel like you probably want to say something to
Yeah. The what I hear there is basically that instead of thinking about it like it's do I serve myself or do I serve other, is actually the transcendent position is a deep connection to source, to like the moment, to
I like say for me, sorry to cut you off, I just like to what is real. Somehow that calibrates me
yeah,
to being like, so what is real here?
yeah.
And
Mhm.
from there, yeah.
Yeah, so and then you're in collaboration with what is real and what is emergent, what is true, what is like present, what is there. And that is actually a very powerful aligning force. The other thing that I have been thinking about a lot here, and maybe I can articulate it coherently, is that often this distinction, this delineation that it's sometimes a false dichotomy that we get ourselves into of whether or not you're going to serve yourself or you're going to serve other. It seems to me that the more sophisticated and longer your view of self interest is, the more your behavior and right action will align with serving others, right? This is like to recognize our interconnectedness and that what you do to other, you do to yourself.
Yeah,
Um,
that's some high level attainment
yeah. And these
to
are
have.
just, we're kind of jamming on the various ways that you can perceive and build your stories so that you are guided in your day to day life around the question that is relatively human to have, that is like, do I serve myself or do I serve this other person? Do
Hmm.
I do what I want to do or do I do what my wife wants me to do? Like,
Yeah.
how do I compromise? How do I collaborate? And it's a it's a totally normal and a huge part of our lives, this balance.
It is, and it's, in my experience, no matter how many books I read and how loquacious I am in explaining some of these dynamics, like I still get put in a situation with my partner where I'm like, fuck, what is the what is the right action here?
Mm-hmm.
Am I betraying myself?
Yeah,
Am I being unfair to her?
yeah.
Am I being a bad man, or just a good human for, like, and I think I see that as the part of the mystery, part of the process, really, and it's okay. And I think some of us, especially if we're elevated in the field of helping others, can maybe beat ourselves down privately or publicly about like not having the answers
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time or
Mm-hmm.
some of the time. But like, no, no, it's like in the constant trying to surmount that. And it is a great spiral. We're constantly moving through similar fields, but with greater wisdom.
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the other day I was going paragliding and my buddies picked me up, and one of them is a 25-year-old kid who just graduated college, and he says, "Oh, Ari, your wife's about to give birth. You guys are about to have a child." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Oh, so that means you are too busy this season. You can't paraglide." And I said, "Hmm. Well, no, I think that honestly, I think I'm free to do whatever I want.
Hmm.
But it might just turn out that what I want to do is be home with my wife and child." And he's
Yeah.
like, cool. Like, there we so many people make a mistake. So many people make egregious mistakes of building their stories around I have tos and I can'ts, and um failing to just take responsibility for their decisions and to recognize that when they do something, it is possible for them to choose it. And also, it is possible for them to say no to something, to shed obligation. This, I think, is one of the highest leverage thing that the majority of people, this is like such low hanging fruit. It's just like examine your speech, and every time that you say I have to or I can't, just say I am choosing to or I won't,
Hmm.
and just build more agency into your story around what you do. Because I don't think that I'm an obligate servant to my wife and child,
Hmm.
and that feeling would create such problematic emotions in me, and and create such a rift inside of myself, who as a human being I just have such strong needs for autonomy.
Hmm.
So it seems like there's just a lot of unforced errors happening in humanity, where we are confused with what we're allowed to want and what we're allowed to do and how much we're allowed to say no. And
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And often, maybe we're getting in the weeds, but often it's also like communicating about those things is not always done in the proper way. And, you know, one can, um, one can bring up a need, like a very valid need or a want, and then that may not be communicated in the right way or received the right way, and that just spirals out into something that should not have even happened.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, again, that is the process because everything we everything we experience is a result of something we have not recognized within us. And it has to be recognized. Like that's basically the game. So it just keeps going and going until we refine our equilibrium and the finesse with which we approach with reality.
Can you just double click on that and just like, if you were to, as clearly as you can right now, articulate what the game is for people, that thought that you have, and what is the backbone of so much of your art and so much of the message in all of your films. You know, I've rewatched them in the last couple of days and just have been moved to tears and sobbing on so many of just recognizing my own hero and my own being a live player in this game. So what is the game?
What is the game? Dang. Hmm. Well, in one way, the game is it is unraveling all the false layers, not bad layers, but just false layers down into reality, connecting to that reality, and from there allowing that life to really acting in this world from that signal, from that pure signal. So I know that that may seem a little abstract, but basically we can spin our wheels for our whole life. And I think most of our humans, including parts of us, I don't know, maybe that will be me. Maybe I'll die with, being like, fuck, I really just spun my wheels. I never really made it out of the hamster wheel. And I could see outside, I could look, but I never was able to make it. Maybe that will happen. The aim is not that though, but and I think I'll have one foot out at least. But essentially, we go into these wild labyrinths in things that make us feel like they're important and they matter. And a lot of that is biological impulses, inbuilt instincts that we inherit as biological life forms, and also ancestral inheritances, within our body, within our DNA, within the energy bodies. So all those things guide our decisions and give us a lens through which we see reality and through which we act and we suffer and we win sometimes and so on. So for me, the game is, in simple terms, is having enough dignity in self-choosing and self-authoring on one's own terms with clear seeing, feeling, and acting. To really be in unison with all these other forces within this beautiful earth. That's why my works, and I'm somewhat graduating out of that, but my artworks, the ones that you mentioned, came out of a much stronger indignation than I feel now about external and internal forces, unrecognized, so mostly unconscious, which stall, prevent, and destroy our capacity for that free choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Through which the divine, great, transcendent being shows up. And so it's that dignity of overcoming those forces, of identifying them, disentangling, and in place creating enough authority and self-knowing that those things no longer even matter because they have nothing to connect to or hang on to. And specifically for men, and I think it's for men that the hero's journey is much more inspiring. It's for men that adventure really makes sense, and it's not a cultural institutionalized artifact now. And I think maybe it should be. Not maybe, it should be, which is a path forward of development of surmounting these forces and claiming oneself as an author. But yeah, sorry, I kind of I forget exactly what your prompt was there.
The prompt was like, "What is the game?"
Yeah, what is the game? So yeah, I
And
don't
then
know that I gave a concise one, but
no, I like your answer. And just to add your previous answer that prompted the question, it was like taking through all of the signals available to you, recognizing the unrecognized parts of yourself.
hmm,
One of the deepest one of the most profound parts of Kingdom, your film, is as the hero goes into the shadow of society, into the shadow that exists, that swirls around him as a giant storm. He sees a toothed, scary, demonic creature that he reaches out to touch, and the moment he really makes contact with it, it turns into him. It is
Mm,
him. He recognizes, oh, that bad thing that I saw outside of myself is in me. It is in me.
hmm.
Um, and this is a profound thing. Have you listened to this podcast between Aubrey Marcus and John DeMartini?
Was that the one about evil recently?
Yes.
Yeah, I listened to half of it.
Yes. It was
Yeah.
unimpressive from both of their parts as far as communicators, but the core principle that DeMartini is laying out is actually, I think, a really profound one. And this is that they're, you know, the way I kind of see it is just like a yin yang. It's like a lens that you use for life that is a yin yang, that there really is nothing that is ever out of balance. And all of the bad shit that you see has good stuff in it. And all of the good stuff you see has bad stuff in it. And there is never a moment where the universe is out of balance and that the world is
Hmm.
out of balance.
Yeah.
Go.
Well, y- yeah, from which level of the floor, like from what vantage point though, right? Because like if if you're a worm and you got squashed by someone's foot, and the human can say, well, no big deal, worm. You're now like that energy that you were is now somewhere else. It's all good.
Uh-huh.
And you keep walking. That's cool. But from the worm's point of view, there's a different opinion, right? So it's easy to say that. But like and I don't want it's interesting because I guess I'm going into like some relativism here, but that there's like a self, that's why different spheres of existence, there are different different frameworks for organizing reality. And there are gradients within those. There is something that's better and there's something that's worse. But that's why higher attainment of consciousness, which is it's a journey, and I don't know if it even happens in a lifetime. For some people it may. Yeah, the non-duality can become activated and one sees beyond the polarity of this structure of our realm.
Mm-hmm.
But that structure is also real within the realm. So I think it's quite cold and heartless to just say, well, so what? And again, from a higher being, from a higher perspective, it is a so what, because they see the game completely differently. But I imagine a higher being, some ethereal being, let's say an angelic being with a great heart, would also say, and I'm also so sorry because I totally feel everything you're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
because all that feeling of grief and sorrow and loss is also part of the whole thing that we're all living in.
Yes.
And it's also real. And
Mm-hmm.
also it doesn't matter. So I think it's more complex than just this waving it off. Because it also makes it so easy to just be on this high philosophical chair
Mm-hmm.
and be like, no, it's all good. It's all, I understand it all. Like, it doesn't matter. Because that, like, it's just easy. Anyway,
Yeah,
that's
I
those are
don't
some.
really. There's, I guess, the idea that this perspective comes from waving off painful or difficult or tragic things. Um, I don't necessarily think that's what is on offer here. But let me just put this back into the realm of Min and self authorship and why this is such a profound lens just in your own life. And that I think if we can, I think I kind of have an answer for this, which is basically that you should always use this lens on yourself and you should never use it on someone else.
Mm. True.
And
Yeah.
what this looks like is like, oh, that painful thing that happened to me, maybe it didn't actually happen to me. Maybe maybe like the first step would be, like recently in men's group, we go through this big process that I refer to as completing the past. It's basically like take up a memory, a specific memory you have of your parent betraying you in some way, doing something that hurt, something that you're still like, that is still charged. For a lot of men in the group, it's like, it might be sexual molestation. It might be, an alcoholic parent humiliating them intentionally. So many of these things. And then the first step is kind of like you go from thinking that it was something that happened to you, that they did to you, to realizing that they were actually going through something.
Mm-hmm.
That, oh my God, my mother was actually in so much pain that she was using alcohol so consistently, and she was so disconnected and didn't have a capacity to foster a deep connection with her own son. What an incredibly painful thing. So like the first step is to like get out of your own victimhood and into some kind of compassion for another person. That, wow, my
Mm-hmm.
parent was actually going through something, that they were actually a person too, right? So it kind of just like the first move is out of victimhood. And then the second move is like, okay, that thing actually did something for me. I know it. Let me find it. What is it that it showed me? Because even if someone demonstrates how not to act, they are telling you, they are like helping you get clear on your values. They're helping you clarify what right action is. They're helping you feel what it's like for someone who is so disconnected and so distracted that can't be in their own body and is drunk all the time and yada, yada, yada. There's such important lessons there.
Mm-hmm.
And what people are realizing as they go through this process is, oh my God, like, even though he like abused me, he was actually teaching me what is important to me. He was teaching me how not to be. He was teaching me how important it is for me to be a person who is safe, who is like a protector. And those things that previously, yesterday, it was something that was done to me. It was something that the world slighted me. It was like, one man said, I have been mad at God for 40 years
Mm-hmm.
because how could he let this happen to me? And then he realizes that, oh my God, his mother was actually going through something incredibly profound that was so, so negative, and that she had no support, never had any support, never any education, nothing. Into compassion, and then realizing that, wow, like, I have never done that as a parent. And that's probably why. And so, like I said, using this on yourself all of the time. Where are my pains trying to teach me? How is my greatest trauma, my superpower, waiting to be realized and integrated?
Mm-hmm.
And then when other people share their pain with you, it is so much easier to empathize and be like, wow, yeah. Like, I felt my own pain, and that taught me how to like understand that you have pain too.
Yeah.
Also, furthermore, what this also shows is when you start doing this process, this is a process that you go through that gets you unstuck. It's like and as you do this consistently, you realize, okay, I refuse to be stuck. The moments that I feel stuck, I know that like I have tension and I have energy. There's like unprocessed fuel for me to move forward on my path, for me to integrate the shit that I used to think was bad and that was done to me, that I was like I was victimized by, and now to turn it into my power, into my virtue, into my lessons, into my character.
Yeah.
And then once you do that process, you'll actually start hearing in other people how they have commitments to staying stuck. I think that one of the things that we're dealing with in our world right now, kind of the original question of like, what is the salacious distractions? I think one of the most salacious distractions is victimhood, that we tell each other sob stories that garner sympathy and shallow connection. And so we cling on to those things. We did it in childhood. We bump our head, we go cry to our mom, and we never actually grew out of that. And so now we're just addicted to bumping our heads and crying to the mothers that we find in our friends and the people around us. And so this process of completing the past, this process of really striving for the perfection of like something bad happened. Okay, what is the good in it? Like something good came from it too. Last week we buried Haley's grandmother. And when someone is 93 years old and passes and is tired of living in a body and says, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to sleep. And they say, yo, it's okay, grandma, fall asleep. She says, no, I mean sleep. And you're like, no, okay, it's okay. So then when she passes, you could say, oh, grandma died. People are like, oh, I'm so sorry. But it's pretty easy in that position to see, oh, her death was actually like enormous relief and a completion in so many ways. So, so I don't really know how to I don't really know how to take this process and apply it to like the Palestinian genocide. And that's not where I really work. That's not really where I work in my life. But I do know that in the last month, I have processed resentments that I had towards my father for things that happened when I was 15 years old. And like, I feel bigger and more expansive and clearer and like wiser. And he has done nothing to ameliorate that injustice that happened then. He's not spoken into it at all. He's not changed anything. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't like mean that I'm like condoning it, but it is my impetus to complete it. It is my impetus to drive forward. It is my impetus to like shed the shit that I drag around as emotional baggage that I hold on in my body that literally is tight in parts of my physical form. There is tension in there that is associated with a story around what happened at the dinner table when I was 15, man. And so I don't know how to apply it externally to the worm who got squished or to the Palestinians who were genocide was enacted onto. But I do know that it is an empowering way for me to live my life, and I don't expect other people to do it. I don't expect everyone to like want to transmute their biggest traumas into their greatest superpowers, but I take it for myself, and I think it's useful for myself.
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's useful. And it's, I mean, as we were saying earlier, that is the game, that whatever is unconscious will show itself in some way. And ultimately, like you said very accurately, you have to take full radical responsibility for the abuse or distortions or anything unjust that happened to you or to me. Like, I have to take responsibility, because I imagine that no matter what your dad did in the years after to make that better, not much would have changed, because you carried that in your body and he can't take it out of you. You have to feel it, because part of you, your psyche, your soul, your being, registered that as an injustice and cemented it as such. And no one can do that for you. And it's like that, then, I guess the function of growth here is what's being asked of us in these moments is to grow into a greater spatial consciousness around that, to be able then to have enough space around it to hold it and to allow that to emerge and to dissolve and to restructure. And that's the function, I think, of expanding consciousness. Consciousness needs to continue expanding more widely so that the unconscious can then unravel within it. And it's almost like, if we go into, I'm going to go into some, like if we go into some of the more speculative aspects, and some people call scientific, like let's say astrology or any of the, let's say the way that we may be programmed as beings, a priori kind of like features within our being. They'd be magnetized by the various elemental forces and influences, let's say, of the planet, the calibration of the cosmos, the universal clock. Well, it's interesting because within that, the more you study it, there are markers for certain traumas, with certain parents within our birth charts. And this is very consistent. Well, like, how the fuck is that like there? Yet it happens just seemingly accidentally within our lives, but yet it's in my chart. Well, it's interesting because it seems like some things are just literally baked in. And I'm being somewhat speculative here, baked in for us to contend with so that we can expand in various ways, right? So it's almost like, um, yeah, anyway, maybe this line of thinking is not the most appropriate, but it is it's an interesting feature of this whole experience that we're having, is that
Well,
there are markers of things we need to experience in order to grow or not, or succumb, and we don't go beyond them and they collapse us into more degenerate forms.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of like one of the sub questions of like, what is the game, is like, what are we up against?
Hmm.
What are the forces that we're up against? And, distraction and dissociation were two that we talked about. And then the other one that I just mentioned is victimhood, that like you use your stories in a way that holds you down instead of lifts you up, and
Yeah.
that you allow people around you to use their stories to hold themselves down.
Yeah. Well, that's salacious. That one is delicious, right? Like I know what that tastes like. It's because there's a negative pleasure in it.
Mm-hmm.
Negative pleasure in that there's a little existential kink in there to be like, well, I have some like, power here by saying life and circumstances and this other person or these people like did this to me. And therefore I don't have to act now because like they ruined it all, you know? But like, as you were saying that, I was wondering, it's a question to you and me, but can we feel ourselves into what does that feel like? I don't know that it's immediately available to actually be really potent, powerful, and completely in self-authorship, and like to walk a street that way, to meet another human in that way. And I wonder if someone in their victimhood is able to, even if we were to invite them, like what's the opposite of being a victim? Can you imagine yourself being actually completely empowered and not beholden to any other influence? Is that possible? I feel in a state of victimhood, I would be way too righteous and bitter to even want to try that. And then the excuses would come. But really, what it betrays is that in that moment, there's simply a choice in consciousness. Your experience now could be a set of stories that disempower you and leak energy and keep you in a degenerated state.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could just, for a moment or more, you could choose to expand in this other option and start downloading this other, firmware and like, new patches
Mm-hmm.
and kind of imagine that. But there's, I think that existential kink, the negative pleasure prevents us from doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In our world, we have just a handful of stories where this possibility has been shown to us. The one that comes up and that I point people to most often is Viktor Frankl, right? He lived in a concentration camp, which is the most visceral and obvious circumstance that someone is doing something to you. Take your life, kill your family, take your belongings, starve you, torture you, um, strip you of all of your dignity, of all of your rights. And yet, they can't make you hate them. And so, for me, when I think of this, I don't think of this as ostensibly true, scientifically true. I think of authorship not as the physical manifestation, but more that I do always have choice in how I will make my story about this, how I will position myself in this narrative of what is happening. And oftentimes, when you talk to people, they cling to objective reality as if they are in contact with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the narrative that they have of what happened.
Yeah.
And I invite people to let go of it being true, like they're going to get proven wrong by someone when they say that they're the world's best parent. And just tell themselves that they're the world's best parent and say it first thing when when your feet hit the floor in the morning, and live it into existence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am an author of my own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And if, you know,
I do, and this is, I mean, here's the profound struggle with that because in our day and age, more of us are realizing this, and it makes a lot of sense because it is a real dynamic, it's a reality, and yet we get taken off the path, which is the most common ailment, right? Which makes some people just give up, and others kind of lament the plight of being human. In religious circles, people will just talk about the feebleness of humanity and the weak-willedness, and there's truth in that. But you're right. We make those choices, and that's the strength and power that we have as human beings. It's incredible. That's our sword.
mm-hmm.
And yet we have these things that bring us back. And this is actually something I wanted to bring in within the field of embodying our masculinity, and it is the relationship we have to our emotions. And I bring that up because it's the emotions that can flood us and take us back into whole, realms of familiar disempowerment, or the lens changes all of a sudden. Like I may have this very well thought out and understood framework of authorship and even practice it, yet some sort of familiar wave of shame and other things just paints the world in a completely different field. And so what I want to say, to me, the most helpful thing has been uh, creating the skill, nurturing the skill of really being able to process these emotions,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the simplest thing to describe, yet one of the more challenging things to really become proficient at. Because my experience, really thoughts are a byproduct of feelings, and feelings are a byproduct of stored energy within the body, right? And so the self-authorship helps to build the structure, and the choices reinforce actions and behaviors that restructure it. Yet that hidden energy that you were saying within the body and the soma and those emotions, yeah, if we're not creating the capacity, the bandwidth, the spaciousness, and the equanimity, plus benign kind of like affection within the field to allow them to unwind, then in my personal experience, progress is slow
Mm-hmm.
and painful.
Okay,
Which is why we have the breakdown of the whole, like, sorry, last thing is like, mind, frame and mindset stuff, is very difficult to implement without that.
so what has this process been for you?
So the process is, there's various ways to approach it, but the emotional clearing is, so the body is the thing that grounds it all. So in general, we are quite disconnected with our bodies. So when we start doing this work of self-realization, one has to resensitize the body, which means various parts that were numbed out, dense, tense, and we don't even have a conscious connection with, have to start being animated. And that's through breath, movement, but ultimately conscious awareness. From a zoomed out perspective, that's really bringing in more consciousness into matter and animating matter through conscious awareness of rescuing. And, it's the whole journey of going down into the underworld, into the chest and belly and loins, and so there's a process of holding that with so resensitizing the body with that. is allowing greater and greater periods of allowing an emotion to be present without fleeing it into the mind, with different strategies of, I'm going to heal this, or I got to do this to avoid that. And like, whatever, there's so many very convincing thought strategies that take us away from feeling. And so being able to stay with it, not go with the thoughts that come, and then gradually allowing even some form of affection, some form of warmth, some form of unconditional allowance. Doesn't need to be healed ever, doesn't need to be moved ever. And a kind of curiosity. The curiosity, really, the function is it helps us stay and it helps us engage with this thing. Mm-hmm. But because our default reaction with the traumas when we don't have spaciousness and we're just tight around that is to immediately flee into strategies of avoiding it, suppressing it, tightening those body parts into rigid character structures which warp our body physiology, create chronic pains, autoimmune diseases, all that stuff. Is non-conditionally allowing it to be there, inviting it in, and being able to stay with it. And it's more and more I realize that a real masculine virtue and skill is actually taking, this is kind of esoteric, but that's, it came in a moment of realization and experience, is like taking charge of matter is a very masculine pursuit. What does that even mean? Matter. Well, taking custody of matter, almost fathering creation by enveloping it with a pre-conscious force of penetration, penetrating matter, and allowing it not judgmentally to just be within this field of your consciousness. That is the body, but that is the family too. Protection, guidance, just knowing, and it's actually expanding that field. And that can only happen when we've already dealt with some of these gnarly parts within ourselves. And that capacity now starts building into the custodianship, and for some men into kingship. The word king is thrown around so cheaply around, and we all do it. And a lot of my friends and a lot of my people in men's group throw it around, but I think I want to bring back the word king to be used very, very specifically and not so generously, because it's a rare, rare skill for a man to give their life to be. Anyway, maybe we can tap into that after. It's a whole other tangent.
Well, I want to stay with this idea of being in custody of your body, being a custodian of your body, and taking your conscious awareness and allowing your physical body to exist consciously, to bring your awareness into your physical body so that you make space for it to exist unconditionally. The other thing that I'm kind of wondering about right now, that was also kind of, a spinoff of this DeMartini idea, is the idea of balancing. And he talks about it being an equation that he balances things literally, like just, finding balance here. And when I'm thinking about this in the somatic sense, I think, okay, so I'll just take my own example that I used earlier, the painful memory of being at the dinner table at 15 years old and experiencing this injustice from my father. If I used my conscious awareness to go into my body, to find the place where I'm holding that tension, and to bring in a benign warmth, a loving awareness that says, you don't have to change, you don't have to move, you don't have to leave, it's okay, I just am here, like bringing my presence and making a space for you to exist. I am just like a custodian of your existence. One of the things I think I used to have a misconception of is that if I did that process thoroughly, that it would go away or that it would move. And what I'm wondering now is actually if you were to have some kind of relief, even momentarily, and then notice that the old pattern of thought, feeling, or energy arises again, the question I would have is, how many times did I have that thought? The thought of injustice. How many times did I tell that story? That story of injustice. How many times did I like have a behavior that was covering up that story, or that I was distracting myself from the pain that came from that story? And I think
Mm.
that when I look back on my life, I probably spent 2 decades building up one side of the equation.
Mm.
And if my first take at self authorship didn't produce freshness in my thoughts and feelings, well, then I would just invite myself to consider how many rocks I had stacked on one side of the scale, living from injustice. That something had been wronged, something was victimized, something was bad, and that the tension in my body was bad, wrong. And so now I'm kind of thinking about these things not as like that I can erase them in one go, but more like if I'm just bringing balance to my system, even somatically, it says, how long did you hold this tension around this injustice? And now, how much benign, loving awareness can you bring to the situation, and a reconnection to your somatic experience, so that the system just starts to balance itself naturally, normally?
Mhm.
This is something I'm kind of like have been thinking and talking about recently, of like this
Yeah.
balancing and this like making the equation.
Like how long do you have to stay with it over time as it continues to reemerge for it to balance out? Is that what you mean? Or
It kind of is, it kind of is that. And my it kind of is that, yes. And it's like it also just kind of brings up an awareness around like how long I've actually been carrying it around, and how
Hmm.
big of a space inside of my body and my mind and my like how much of my pain body is made up of that one memory.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and how much is compounded from that one misunderstanding or not, or whatever distorted perception of a real injustice at that time, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
and the real like the practical like advice that comes out of this is like, brother, can you give your healing as much energy as you gave your injustice, your wound? Because we carry these things around for years and years and years and decades and decades and decades. And then we have, we spend 3 months in men's group and are frustrated that somehow like everything in our lives is not different.
Hmm.
And it's like, man, like, yeah, like you have just gotten the awareness that your whole energetic existence is, you know, uh, on a very sensitive scale, and you've piled mountains of rocks onto the side of injustice, and now you're just learning the process of starting to like bring unconditional loving awareness and being a custody of you, or being in custody of your body, your experience, your nervous system. And it's like, man, if we just recognize the balance there, like if we just kind of think of it as a scale, the reason that this is like real for me is because like I love David R. Hawkins' book Letting Go.
Hmm.
But every time I read it, I'm like, it's almost like angsty and frustrating of like, okay, I did it, like still there.
Well, as you're saying that, like my one ongoing inquiry is like, can we actually heal or let go at the same level of consciousness? Like if we remain on that level of consciousness, can we heal things as if they're sort of like dark zones in our body that just sort of dissolve? Or is it more at that level of consciousness, those things are real artifacts and features of that being,
Mhm.
but by raising that consciousness, by raising our purview and expanding, that remains part of some lower part, and now you're just parenting it, right?
Absolutely.
So
And
maybe
this
it's
is
not so much I am the same guy always just clearing stuff, but I'm actually a growing, progressive being.
This is exactly what I mean. This is
Okay.
how I am understanding the process of completing the past, where you go from victimized, this is something bad that happened to me, and then understanding it in increasing levels of consciousness, where you go from victimized, that this was bad happened to me, to, oh my God, I'm actually have been missing that there was the humanity of my mother right in front of me. She was suffering.
Mm,
And then to go further and say, okay, that her suffering was not in vain. It actually taught me something. Let me integrate it.
mm,
My experience, my suffering was not in vain. Let me integrate it. And then coming to gratitude, and ultimately to an equanimity and an affordance of what is and what happened, and just allowing it to be. This is like the ascendance from victimhood to a non-dual perspective. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm so happy that you're helping me understand and articulate it.
yeah, likewise. Well, that's why I think in this whole space of healing or self-activation, which is maybe another pole of it, is I think the real important takeaways are growing capacity and bandwidth more so than tricks and tools to alleviate symptoms. Look, it's interesting. The allopathic medical model, this occurred to me right now. Many of us, because we're products of our culture, use it within this alternative, new emerging healing space, right? Because it's like we're in some people, and I've been absolutely, and I still do it in some ways, is we try to balance ourselves out so we can then just go out into the world, the collective construct, and be some sort of healthy and active ideal version of myself with my ego
Mhm.
within that, without the impediments of those gnarly parts that keep me back.
Mhm.
So I could be, consume the world in the best way possible. But that's not the real game, right? That's the game with the dead end. So I think capacity, bandwidth, and this like greater and greater journey of expansiveness that really has no ending. And I think the finality, I think, and certainty are two things that screw us over. Is like looking toward that final resting place usually makes us, be convinced of ideologies or final conclusions. But yeah, I think it's about expanding. Long story short, leaning into practices of expansion and more awareness,
Mhm.
more and more presence, without some sort of final resting spot of comfort or victory, I think is where I personally invest my time and energy,
Mhm.
because I know that those always yield a long-term return on investment as opposed to insights, brilliant ideas, or, yeah.
I think, yeah, you're pointing to one of the biggest ills of our world that men uh, fall prey to, is short-sightedness. Just that there's a quick fix for this, or that there's some kind of finality nearby.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
it's that's another salacious distraction, and it's at the root of a lot of misery, and I know for me a lot of and discomfort. But yeah, go on.
I'm just curious if you'd be willing to share some of the things that you've wrestled with over this, that, like, we've talked about kind of your practice and your process, and I'm wondering what ways that, you know, one of the things that I have recognized in coaching for 5 years is that so many people are dealing with such adjacent or similar uh, things. And so I'm wondering what flavors of humanity you've integrated.
Mm. Yeah, what flavors have I integrated? Well, I just looking back 20 years ago, I was a very different little human. Um, a lot more aliveness has come forth,
Mm-hmm.
a lot like less of a need to validate, to show, to display. That those things still, are present in some ways. A lot more freedom of expression. Yeah, not fighting to stand out, which has been such a relief, I've realized over the years. Not fighting to seem to know, to be better, all these things. And more capacity to love and care, though not enough, not enough. And that's a work in progress. But the main things that I've wrestled with, there's the things we all share. A lack of confidence in showing up in situations that is satisfying, real, with vitality, in which we can really say we participated in that moment, whether it was a vacation, a party with our friends, an encounter on the street, where we can walk away from that and be like, I was really there, and I was like really with everyone and like being with myself. Ultimately, for me, it's been, that's why I always go back into the body. It's been a tension, an existential constriction, a tensing up in the solar plexus, in the heart, and the belly, where we all, go into this existential clench of I'm going to tighten up and stay safe. Some people do it differently. We do it in various ways. We metabolize energy to protect ourselves in various ways, and bioenergetically that shows up in different body types. I think it's an endomorph is my body type. I'm more elongated, tall, thinner, longer limbs, and there's various reasons for that. But if anyone's interested, they can look into core energetics, bioenergetics, and stuff. But yeah, it's that existential clench of like protecting against something, and almost saying no to life, and almost saying, no, I'm not going to give you what you want. I'm not going to show you. And then there's a almost like holding on to some sort of vengeful way against existence and the world. And that creates a lot of pain within this particular character bind, because life force wants to move out into the world. It wants to connect and touch and know. And at the same time, the protective mechanism is saying, no, that won't happen. You're going to hold back. You're going to stay here. And that force is just so unendurable, right? When you want to reach out for love, but something in you says, but you're also not worthy of it. And also, no, but I'm not going to give it to anyone because now I have the higher ground. And then that higher ground is extreme pain because there's no connection and no love, right? So, yeah, that's definitely being a core feature within my own karmic journey. But I recognize various different ones with other people, and pain. And it's anyway. I'll leave it at that. How does that land for you, hearing that?
The clenching, tightening, and saying no to life resonates a lot. And I think that the example of how this shows up in many men and in myself in the past, the one that comes up most clearly is a chronic doubt about who you chose as your partner.
Mm.
And this clenching around that says something like, I'm going to withhold my fullness and my service until I get what I think I deserve.
Mm. From the partner or from another human, whoever is the most perfect human for.
Yeah, it's basically like I'm waiting for like the archetypal ideal to show up in my life before I show up as my full self, and I really give myself completely, and I really like try. And so, in my own life, I think I half-assed a million different ways, waiting in a pretty entitled and victimized position. And it's not what I do now. I create my wife actively every day in how I perceive her and how I position myself in my story of my marriage and of my relationship and of my family. I do that very actively, incessantly.
Mm,
And I kind of refuse. I I kind of refuse to be hurt by her.
mm,
And it's not through invulnerability. It's not through like that I'm just so tough. It's more like I kind of, this process that I've been describing to you, I'm trying to do it more in real time now, as
mm.
opposed to letting stuckness and pain create stagnation, tension, and tightness in me. I'm trying to
Yes.
do this in real time now because I've had so much success with it, processing old pains and old traumas and my family of origin and like 2 years ago, a friend died in an avalanche while we were skiing together, like right in front of me. There he was, boom. And
Mm,
it was the strangest gift I've ever received. But there's like a direct line from Eric's death to my child.
yeah.
Direct line. Like it literally, like it taught me things. It showed me things I never would have been able to see without that.
Like what? I don't know if it's in the, maybe, is that something you've spoken about before? Is there anything you can share about that? Or
Oh, it instantly woke me up to the consequences of the risks that I take every single day. I've been a backcountry skier for 15 years before that point, and I had triggered a ton of avalanches, and I'd never seen what it does. Like I had seen what it does to snow and rocks and trees, but I'd never seen what it does to person. And so I was like, holy shit, like the level of consequence around the risks I had been taking, I don't think I hadn't really fully realized. And the most profound one was that I realized that Eric died, but I didn't. And that like life still went on and that we were all still alive and the beat was continuing. And when I realized that, I actually found out that I had been operating my entire life from this assumption that I was the center of the universe. And it wasn't like a narcissistic, like I'm the most important thing in the universe, but it was that like my life, my awareness was like when I was like 19, I had this crazy trip on salvia where I got struck with this profound fear that I had somehow bumped the CD player of existence and it was now skipping tick, 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 and that I was going to have to unplug it and in doing so erase all of existence to start it over. And when Eric died in the days after that, it brought this crazy salvia trip back to my mind of like this huge fear that my mistake that led to my death would extinguish existence. And that with my death, everything died. And I realized that my death doesn't stop anything else. And so I was simultaneously, my life was more important and less important. And that
amazing.
I got off of the hook of existence and I got onto the hook of my family, my relationships, my life, my impact. I turned up my coaching practice like immediately. I invested in myself. I hired Nico. I wanted to grow my business. I knew that I had things to give and people that I could serve and that I wasn't. And I was scared and I was withholding because I was scared. And so literally like Eric's death is directly connected to my wild courageousness in getting married, in starting a family. Because these are insane projects. You'd have to be crazy to take it on. So I needed some kind of wild inspiration, some kind of crazy inspiration. And the universe brought it to me in the form of a horrific tragedy.
Mm.
where I dealt with this man's partner, and I dealt with this man's mother, and I dealt with his body, and I dealt with his belongings, and I dealt with my own guilt of having chosen where we were skiing and having skied the same line just before him. The
Mm.
survivor's guilt and so much, man, so much. But ultimately, it was such a strange gift, but it was indeed a gift. It was indeed a gift. And it was one thing I was like, Eric is not going to die in vain. This is going to be good for me. This is going to be good for me. I'll fucking work as hard as I have to find how this is a gift for me.
Mm. Hmm. Well, well, yeah, I commend you on really, really fully taking on the full force of that energy and that impact and embodying it. And it absolutely is honoring, at least in some way, his passing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably the best thing you could really do with that situation.
Yeah, I like to think so.
Hmm.
Uh, we're
To use
about
it as fertilizer for
absolutely.
growth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fuel, man. It's fertilizer. And, you know, in some ways, it's like fertilizer of like, oh, you sprinkle it on it and like in the future, something will happen. And in another way, it's like a giant collision. Like it didn't take years for this to happen. Like I saw my life, my mortality, my fragility, my risk, my consequence. Like I saw it like soon, fast.
Mm.
So I hope that it continues to be fertilizer because the like collision changed my trajectory in days.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
basically have stopped backcountry skiing almost entirely.
Mm.
Not out of some conscious choice. I just noticed that it's not that alive in me to go.
Yeah. The energy has been spent in some ways.
I agree. Yeah. But my energy for is still very alive. It's still very alive. And so it also taught me lessons there, and it gave me a new perspective of my risk and my what is at stake and how I want to, you know, like what I want to teach people and what it is that I have to like serve people around and motivations and why we do these things and what is at stake and having a robust life on the ground that is worth being cautious for. All of these things are like clear as my impact in the world.
Mm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love that.
Lubo, thanks so much, man. I just listened back to our most recent podcast, and what I found was so interesting was you had just released Kingdom, and I hadn't recorded a podcast in a year. And so there's
Mm.
just something about, apparently, there's something in me that says when I want to launch a new something that I call you, and there's like this co creation that christens the whole thing. And so I
Mm.
appreciate you doing that again with me here.
Amazing. Me too, brother. I always enjoy these conversations and just thinking, like feeling into the situation on our feet. And thanks, you brought up some very useful things for me to
Mm.
consider, especially the last gem of experience that you've had.
Yeah, man.
Yes.
Thanks so much, man. Sending you my love.
Yes. Thank you, brother. All the best.